And I think everybody, 80 out of 100 people who are writing anthropology are very good at biology. India mein, when you have a subject like anthropology, anthropology is still primarily a liberal arts subject. Section B is a lot more scoring than this. All these things that were there in the market, wo kaam nahi karta hai. Okay, so what differentiates one person from another person? Who can reproduce quicker? It requires a different sort of introduction, it requires a different sort of conclusion. You know the topic, but you have to craft an answer then and there. So when you're writing answers and you're practicing answers, you don't want to be doing only the PYQs and going into the exam. Okay, pehle don't write timed answer. Okay, if you're taking analytical question, you try to write an answer to questions jahan pe thoda sa aapko sochna pade. But first thing, my suggestion would be that you be thorough with the syllabus. Right, 70 marks did not come from the last 10 pages. The last 10 pages itself is going to be 100 marks. एक घंटे के लिए बैठ करोगे, so it's not going to give you any sort of returns. So hello everyone, welcome to the session. My name is Nataraj. I'm your anthropology faculty at Sarrthi IAS. See, we are going to start with a session that is primarily aimed at how do you score. So if you see the session is anthropology answer writing strategy, it should actually be anthropology scoring strategy. See, writing in anthropology is basically for a purpose, right? So how do you basically write a paper in anthropology, okay, and compete with whether it is 1200, 1500, 2000, how many other people who basically clear mains and write the optional with anthropology, right? So this entire thing on what should be the right strategy, what should be the right scoring strategy is basically what I want to cover today. The focus is going to be a little more about, so where is anthropology heading at the moment? Okay. Where is anthropology heading in terms of the subject, the nature of questions, market mein kya chalta hai, right? What is the herd mentality like? Why you should not follow that? And possibly what are the things that you should do in order to prioritize for the next, how many other days you have for mains, depends on when you watch it, right? So that is essentially the session. So let's begin. So I said that let's talk about the trend. Let's talk about where is anthropology heading. See, if you take a look at the last decade or so, anthropology has been, I think it's a God's gift to many students who are in service, right? A lot of them don't make that very conscious choice of taking anthropology. They just basically land in anthropology somehow, okay, and it turns out it's a very good subject, right? A lot of students basically go to some other options and it turns out that it didn't work out so well, okay, and then they switch. This is more of a conscious decision to switch to anthropology, right? Anthropology, why am I saying it's like a gift? Actually, anthropology is easier to score. Anthropology is short syllabus. Anthropology, the variability in anthropology is relatively less in comparison to some other sort of options, right? See, barring your technical subjects, it's very few subjects you can actually say ki, bhai, aapne kiya kaise, right? So a lot of subjects where people basically say ki, I think I've done really well. I think I've basically tried to address the demand of the questions, but abhi pata nahi, right? You will hear this a lot. But in anthropology, उतना variability नहीं होता है. So we'll take a look at the last 10 years. See, 2016 to 2019 अगर आप देखोगे, right? So this is a paper जहाँ पे 320, 330, 340, मतलब, it's been like very high scores, right? In fact, I think 2017 or 2018 was even 360. That is, like very, very high scores, right? You basically had. Okay, so a good number of students in the top 100, in 2016 to 2019, okay, because of anthropology score being very high. 2020 to 2022, again, you have a lot of scores that are 300 plus. But if you see, let's say the last 2 years, okay, so I'm going to talk specifically about the last 2 years, okay, till 2022, I don't think it was that difficult to score in anthropology, okay, it is relatively easy to do it. But right now, it is still easy provided you have some pointers in your head. Okay, you have to understand what exactly is the change in trend that is taking place in anthropology as a subject, right? So that is the main thing. See, first point that I want to say, and especially if you're preparing for 2025 mains or 2026 mains ke liye, always remember that anthropology as a subject, previously a lot of students were good at 1 or 2 modules. I love biological anthropology. Oh, I love sociocultural anthro, marriage, family, kinship, different societies, different sort of cultures. Very, very interesting. Paper 2, I'm so passionate about tribes. In fact, I want to go and do, like a PhD on some of these tribes and maybe write ethnographies and re-studies and so on. Or I really like, what village studies were like and how they have basically changed and, all those kind of things, right? So people, it's okay to have areas that, that make you love anthropology, right? But it can't be that, you are good at one particular section and then eventually, you're going to try to score out of that section alone, right? So that is one thing that I want to sort of highlight. When I say that, why so? Because if we are talking about different modules in anthropology, right? So you don't want to be a student who is primarily, good at like ek do module in each paper, right? So that is something that people have to understand. That is not the way it works in 23 and 2024, and I'll also tell you why exactly. See, agar aap paper 1 aapko karna hai, right, you have biological, physical anthropology, you have socio-cultural anthropology, you have theories and miscellaneous, yeah, you can club it along with this, okay, you have archaeology and fossils, which I would basically say is a combined paper, right? When I say it's a combined, when I say that it is combined, it's basically something that you can take a look at it as paper 1 and paper 2 dono mein hai. Right? Although fossils in paper 2 you have barely, okay, you have your Narmada man, you have your Shivapithecus, you have your Ramapithecus, right? So that's basically all you have. You have a little more so in your paper 1. But essentially, your lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic, upper Paleolithic, all of these things are relatively a common sort of module, right? In paper 2, if you see, you have archaeology and fossils, Indian society and tribal, right? So these are basically the module. But I would basically say that these two are a common sort of module. A lot of students essentially felt that biology, because it's a scientific subject, it is easier to score, and I think everybody, 80 out of 100 people who are writing anthropology are very good at biology, okay, because you don't have to learn biology, biology jab likhte ho, right? So there is very little debate in it, right? So if you basically understood it, okay, and you're able to sort of like convey it, with reasonable amount of accuracy with regard to the diagrams and the concepts and applications and all of that, generally it's a very, very scoring wala topic. It's for everybody, right? But this is not something that you can basically only this में bank करना abhi, it is very difficult. So that is one thing that you want to keep in mind, right? If in fact, if you see India mein, when you have a subject like anthropology, anthropology is still primarily a liberal arts subject, right? Anthropology is a science, that's what you should write, okay? But still, anthropology is a subject, okay? Anthropology professors, ये सब अगर आप देखोगे, it is still a lot more sort of liberal arts kind of a subject. So, liberal arts, humanities, I hope you get the idea. In fact, अगर यहाँ पे आप देखोगे, what percent is your social, cultural and theories? Right? So let's say this is basically around 30-35%. Okay, this could be 35%. Okay, and then you have archaeology and fossils, maybe 30%, something along these lines, right? So if you see it, okay, socio-cultural, okay, is not only 35% of your paper, it is actually 90% of your paper too. So if you take a look at your anthropology as a whole, okay, anthropology may you have a wide it's more of a liberal arts subject, more of a humanities subject than just the biology, right? So you've got to have a basic level, a threshold level, okay, above average level in each and every one of these modules in case you want to be scoring in anthropology, right? So biology is definitely important. It is definitely easier to score, okay, but there are many other sort of papers, many other sort of modules, sub-modules you can say, okay, that you have to be at least at a particular benchmark if you want to sort of score. So, agar answer writing kar rahe ho, right, you want to sort of also be including all of these sort of areas as well. 2025, there are students who have basically scored in 2020, 2021, who have scored in 2022, but have not been able to, and even maybe 2022, okay, so people have scored in 2022, but 2023 attempt and 2024 attempt, they have actually not scored. So a lot of students are basically saying that, my friend in service, he has basically written and us samay he has basically scored so and so, but aajkal unke mark aise nahi aa rahe hain, so maybe is anthropology, is it not scoring? Actually, no. Okay, the people who are scoring in anthropology has basically changed to some extent, right? Because aapko thoda sa, you have to change your method. If you see this here, the method that worked in 2020, 2021, 2022, or even prior may, let's say that, you are more of a biology person and more of a tribal person, okay, or you're more of a socio-cultural person and then you're more of, your Indian society person. It's very difficult to sort of pick sides anymore. Okay, you can't have that. Look at some of the questions that you have from your paper 1. Okay, so this is your 2024 ka paper. Okay, so for the ones that the results have actually come. So if you look at question 2A, okay, discuss historical particularism as a critical development to the classical evolutionism. Right, so you have a question that is from your theories module, right, your chapter number 6, okay, theories wala thing. And if you look at question number 2, describe the evidences for food production and domestication of animals with special reference to Mehergarh and throw light on its significance. So this is basically which module? This is going to be your archaeology fossils, if I put in the same module. Okay, the next one is lifestyle diseases, okay, and their impact on human health, disease. This is basically which topic? This is basically your biological anthropology, in which you deal with your epidemiology wala, that chapter, right, that sub chapter, right? So where will you put this? So in case you go in thinking that, I'm going to be choosing archaeology based questions, are you going to be able to get it? Right? Nahi. If you're going to attempt this archaeology question, let's say it's a good question, and let's say you've studied this particular aspect well, you understand the significance of Mehergarh as one of the, yahan pe kuch debates वगैरह हैं. So let's say you know all of these things. Okay, you also have to know your theories, the socio-cultural module reasonably well. Okay, it's a 20 marker for a historical particularism. You also need to know your biological anthropology, jahan pe, you have to be able to handle that as well. Right? So when students were able to sort of depend on the previous year's papers, jahan pe section A used to be mostly your socio-cultural and section B used to be biological, and biological mein you have 3 questions, 3, okay, your question number 6, 7 and 8, usme se 2 aapko select karna hai. Can you do it now? It is relatively difficult. Relatively difficult kahan? It's like it's impossible. Right? So, and that's not the only question. Take a look at this. Okay, I have all these questions. Okay, what is meant by karyotype? Okay, analysis and diagnosis, chromosomal aberrations in man, your chapter number, your genetics and, the medical genetics wala chapter. Define urbanization and discuss its impact on family with examples, right? So this is basically going to be your socio-cultural anthropology, marriage, family, kinship related topics, right? And then, you have discuss your contemporary challenges in field work. Okay, so let's say that your theories and miscellaneous, chapter 6, 7, 8. Okay, you have your linguistic anthro, you have your research methods, you have your theories, us wale module se, right? Okay, check out question number 4. Your question number 4 essentially is again, your theories wala module. You basically have your older one traditions, right? Acheulean and older one traditions, right? Lower Paleolithic. So archaeology, fossils kind of module, and then you have genetic counseling, biology, right? Each of these 3 different questions from 3 different modules require a particular style of writing. Okay, biology, of course, where is your biology, right? So biology, you want to write biology, but you also want to show that it is relevant to either evolution. You want to show that it is relevant to understanding variation. You want to show, it is relevant to some aspects in genetics in our syllabus. You want to show some relevance to, human body, the growth, the human health, understanding of that applications, right? Ye biological anthro hai. Uska ek particular way is there in order to sort of like, learn writing for biological anthro. But along with this thing, you also have 2 different other modules which require a different kind of writing as well. Archaeology, and again, I'll basically go a little more into in depth with this. If you're choosing questions on archaeology, always remember archaeology and archaeological anthropology are slightly different. Okay, archaeology and archaeological anthropology, I'll go a little more into detail. See, archaeology essentially is basically got 3 pillars in it. Okay, one is the collection excavation. Mila kahan? Okay, kaise usko nikalna hai? What has been found? This is the first step. Okay, second step, this is your collection excavation, all of that. Second step is going to be dating. Dating is going to be another part of your syllabus. Relative dating, absolute dating, which one you basically do for which kind of purposes. Okay, that is another one. Okay, but most of your anthropology or archaeological anthropology deals with reconstruction of the past. Right, so if there is a historian, okay, or a paleontologist basically digging, okay, and sort of like looking at this, okay, vis-a-vis an archaeological anthropologist basically taking a look at this, right, two kind of similar, it overlaps to some extent, but there is clear sort of differences. The archaeological anthropologist is interested in sort of reconstructing the past. What was life like? Right? You don't only want to be sort of like describing, the tool was found like this, and uska notch was so and so, and uska angle was so and so, and usko describe karna is like one aspect. Okay? For that, you can, if you can just draw those diagrams, you're like pretty decent. Okay? You basically have your pebble tool tradition, you have your, your hand axe cleaver sort of tradition, usko dikha do, and you've done that part. Right? But a good chunk of it, in archaeological anthropology, in case you want to be writing those answers, you want to be focusing on reconstructing of the past. What is the social life like? What is the cultural life like? Right? What can you tell based on what kind of evidence have been found with certain kind of specifics in those, for those points as well, right? So that is going to be a good archaeological anthropology answer. And then you have your theories, right? So we'll go into a little more detail. But the point is very, very straightforward, right? You want to be scoring. Okay, there is no one particular module you're going to be able to choose and work on. Okay, so you've got to be equally passionate about all, or you're going to be equally dispassionate about all. Okay, equality maintain kijiye. Okay, again, Homo erectus, fossils, archaeology, fossils module. Okay, forensic anthropology, that is going to be a biological anthropology module. This is, I guess, a subset of this, but I'm just saying the sub-modules. Okay, so archaeology and fossils. Okay, and your, biological anthropology, and then you have your theories here. Right? So very, very difficult to score in anthropology today for some students who have actually done well in the past, maybe in 2020, 2021, 2022. If it is one of you, okay, and you had a certain kind of answers, okay, and you had a particular kind of an approach, okay, you know your anthropology, maybe, certain modules require a little more work. Okay, certain modules basically require a little more polishing. Maybe certain modules basically require a little more sort of, refiring, okay, in terms of like, learning how to write that particular module differently. Right, so that is essentially what it is. So 2023 and 2024 you still have, I believe that there is close to 300 marks even this year, right? We have students, in fact there was a student of mine who basically took up the subject post prelims, right? So this was in June, I think exam was in June, July, so July, August and September the student wrote the exam, and paper 2 he has scored 145ish. 145 this year is basically one of the highest in the country, and paper 2 is it's more analytical paper, right? So you understand anthropology में score करना उतना मुश्किल नहीं है, but you've got to have मतलब right? So there are students who have written a little while ago and they've spent a lot more time and invested a lot more number of hours overall in this particular subject, okay? And you have students who are basically scoring even this year with a very high score in a shorter period of time. Okay, what do you need? You need a base level of knowledge, okay, base level of answer writing volume in each of these modules and a particular style of writing for each of these modules, and you're not going to be able to choose anymore. Okay, sorry, section A is sociocultural, section B is biological, section B is a lot more scoring than this. All these things that were there in the market, वो काम नहीं करता है, right? So when you're writing for 2025, you're writing for 2026, okay, anthropology as such is a very small subject, ठीक है? You try to be equally loving of all of these. Again, theories, you have your biological anthropology, and then you have your research methods related sort of topics as well. Okay, I hope this is kind of clear. I have made my point. Okay, social stratification, your sociocultural anthropology, your biological anthropology. Okay, and this again, early evolution kind of topic as well. Okay, so this is the point. Okay, this is the first thing when you want to do. Okay, so when you're writing answers, okay, focus not on one particular module. Try to focus on writing, in every topic. Okay, all the modules that I basically showed you, that all of them you require to be at a particular level. Okay, maybe you have a couple of favorites, okay, but you have to be at a particular threshold at all of these topics, okay, and at a particular level so that you'll be able to handle any of those questions of those short, 8 questions honge, right? So you have to choose a total of 3 questions within that. So from there you can at least pick whatever works for you. You understand, right? But it is not going to be biological and archaeo. It's not going to be sociocultural and fossils. That option is not going to be possible. Okay, next. 2023 and 2024 again is different in a particular manner, right? 2023 and 2024, the paper is becoming more analytical. 2016 to 2019, you had questions. In fact, even prior to that, you had questions jahan pe 80% of the questions are generally, directly from your syllabus, and if not directly from your syllabus, from some sort of PYQ themes. So if you're a student who has basically gone through those PYQs 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, you will have some 70-80% of the questions jahan pe you can handle it. Okay, so what differentiates one person from another person? Who can reproduce quicker? Okay, and who, of course the quality is required, okay, assuming that the quality is already there, so who can reproduce to the level that the person has studied, prior to the exam, and be able to reproduce that on the exam 3 hours, right? If you can do that, you're probably going to get a good score, right? So this was the old mat. You're starting to see a little more sort of analytical nature basically come in 2020, 2021, 2022. At least till 2022, paper 1 was a little more sort of us format mein hi tha. Okay, there will be some bouncers, but overall, it was not that much. But 2023 and 2024, you're actually starting to see questions jahan pe, it requires you to think as an anthropologist in that exam hall. For a good chunk of questions you've seen, right? So many of these questions, agar aapne Mehergarh ke bare mein, like if you've studied it also, right? Even then, that is a question that basically requires you to craft your structure in the exam hall, okay, to try to think what are the sort of debates and, hypotheses that you want to sort of explore, right? In that exam hall, what should be the sequence of those topics that you want to bring into your answer. It requires a different sort of introduction, it requires a different sort of conclusion. You know the topic, but you have to craft an answer then and there. And I think it was, okay, it's a 15 marker, okay, but still 11 marks mein ye karna, thoda sa, I think it is going to take you a little bit of a time. But if you do it, rewards are very high. Right? So you're starting to see questions that are not necessarily completely a rewording of your PYQs. Okay, so when you're writing answers and you're practicing answers, you don't want to be doing only the PYQs and going into the exam, right? See, if you're thorough with the syllabus as a whole, okay, you remember all parts of your syllabus and you have done equal justice to all parts of the syllabus, it will be easier for you to be able to handle any question from that particular topic. But agar aapne choose kiya hai, Okay, I'm choosing, let's say, you take a random topic. Okay, so random chapter. What could it be? Let's say if you're taking 1.5. Okay, so if let's say you're talking about primates, and primates mein aap dekhte ho ki what are the questions that have been asked. Okay, let me just basically prepare for that particular questions alone, and I think I'm done with that particular chapter. This might be something that may not work. राइट सो अगर आप प्रैक्टिस करने वाले हो, स्कोरिंग करने वाले हो, यू वांट टू आल्सो लर्न टू राइट. ओके, पहले डोंट राइट टाइम्ड आंसर. ओके, इफ यू आर टेकिंग एनालिटिकल क्वेश्चन, यू ट्राई टू राइट आंसर टू क्वेश्चंस जहाँ पे थोड़ा सा आपको सोचना पड़े. Right, okay, let's see how I'm going to sequence this particular question. Okay, so I'm going to see a particular question. I'm going to basically sort of start brainstorming what are the things that I possibly know about this particular topic, what are the things that seem relevant, what are the things that mujhe pata hai but doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to make it anyway relevant to that particular question, so usko hatao. Okay, so these are the ones that basically I have. Okay, iske sath main kaise is question ko sort of sequence karu. ओके, इसमें विच पर्टिकुलर सब हेडिंग्स के लिए मुझे कितना एम्फेसिस देना है, व्हाट इज द मेन सॉर्ट ऑफ चंक दैट शुड बी पार्ट ऑफ माय आंसर. राइट, उसके बाद इसको इंट्रोड्यूस कैसे करूँ, इसको कंक्लूड कैसे करूँ, लाइक हाउ डज इट ऑल फ्लो. राइट, ये आपको करके लाइक यू हैव टू सॉर्ट ऑफ प्रैक्टिस फॉर many topics in that syllabus, not just the PYQs. या अगर PYQs कर रहे हो तो it's basically like a practicing for some questions, right? But first thing my suggestion would be that you be thorough with the syllabus. Right, not only those questions that have already been asked in the past are going to be in your exam, and you are going to be seeing a lot more questions that you're going to be seeing for the very first time. You're going to see it in the exam hall, but they are doable if you've actually sort of ये experience आपने किया है, to see some questions that you have not necessarily seen before, and be able to handle it firstly without having a time ka sort of pressure, and then second thing is like you're able to do it even under timed sort of this one. You have to think like very quick. Thoda challenging hai, but this is something that this is answer writing practice. Right, that is basically answer writing practice. Answer writing practice में ये करोगे ताकि whatever is going to be the actual simulation, आप एग्जाम में क्या करने वाले हो. If it's easy questions and you know those topics really well, उसमें introduction and subheadings and sequencing and structuring, all these things you can basically do within those 7 minutes and 11 minutes and 14 minutes, no problem at all. Okay, so can others, by the way. Right, and then okay, the actual question is like half of your paper में आप सोच के लिखने वाले हो to questions for the very first time by yourself. So this also should be an active component of your answer writing practice. This could be in terms of daily answer writing, it could be in terms of your weekly test, it could be in terms of we have certain programs here, right? So QEP plus may we basically make you write Monday, Wednesday, Friday to PYQs and some other sort of analytical questions. But be aware that PYQs alone एक chapter के लिए करके जाना is not something that is going to work. I mean, it has not worked in 2013, 2023 and 2024. So probably you want to sort of keep that in mind when you're preparing for your 2025 and 2026. Okay, and you will feel a lot more sort of confident if you know the concepts. Okay, if you know that entire chapter really well, any question that is brought to you, you will be able to handle it a lot better. Right, you'll be able to handle it a lot better. Take a look at this question. Right, so what are the ethical concerns in biological and sociocultural anthropology because of recent advances, genome research, okay, AI, whatever is basically coming up. In fact, this could be another heading as well. So take a look at some more questions. Right, so these B.K. Roy Berman's concept of buffer zone. So generally conceptual understanding, rather than a fact-based paper. So this one, I'll also tell you, just give me a second. Okay. So this particular question, in fact, I also want to talk about one thing, right? So when you're looking and preparing for, anthropology, also remember one important point, and this will be another slide that will come in just about a few minutes, right? But these two questions will be good examples of that. See, don't chase extreme questions. Now, let's say that, you find a question jahan pe, there are questions, and, students have never seen that before, right? Should those be the kind of questions that you're chasing, right? Are those the kind of questions that you want to sort of like focus on, right? Remember, agar aap compete karne wale ho, you're not competing over the entire 50 pages. 50 pages in the morning, 50 pages in the afternoon. Generally, you're going to be competing in the first 35 pages. When I say first 35 pages, it is going to be those questions that you've chosen and you've been able to handle it to some extent. But you will have some 10 pages, okay, yeah, 15 pages, jahan pe, most of you will basically score similar. You understand, right? Okay, so most of your score agar 35-40 pages se banne wala hai, okay, you don't want to be basically spending more time on that other 10. Now, what do I mean by this? Other 10 में ऐसे questions होंगे जहाँ पे like you probably haven't seen it. Okay, now assume that see these are okay, ठीक है, at least this is a 10 marker. This is a compulsory question. Okay, sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't know it. Maybe some of you have known it. Okay, he had basically come out with some topics and some sort of I think most of you would have at least known a little bit कि मतलब ये इनका topic है, right? You must have done your chapter number 4. In chapter number 4 में you basically study the scholars and what are the kind of theories that they've basically come out with. Okay, buffer zone, bridge community, infranationalism, proto-nationalism, post-primitive, जो भी है, you understand, right? So let's say you know a little bit about this. Okay, ठीक है. But just because you see this particular question does not mean that you rush and try to focus on all the marginal kind of topics that are out of your syllabus. Okay, but the scholars in our syllabus have basically worked on it, right? उन सब के लिए answers formulate करना. See, that is not the main thing. That year, they have basically given you this question. Okay, next year it could be something else, right? So this is not going to be a big difference maker. This year, most of the students who know it, for instance, you will probably get a 1.5 on it, and you will probably get a 2 on it, and you will probably get a 2.5 on it. Okay, यहाँ पे इतना वगैरह difference नहीं होगा. Okay, now let's say if you know it, okay, ठीक है. But the major sort of chunk of marks का difference जो बनता है, it comes in your first 35-40 pages, जो आपको पता था. Right? That is where most of the difference comes. Okay, the students who have good conceptual clarity, who have basically written well, who have executed well, are going to be consistently getting 1 mark extra in maybe 10 markers, 2 marks extra maybe in 15 markers, 3 marks extra maybe in 20 markers. यहीं पे वो difference बनता है. The last 10 wala mein, it's not going to be much of a difference, right? So there is a student who's basically scoring paper 1 mein, let's say in one particular paper he has scored 80. Okay, another person who's basically scored somewhere, I think we had a close to 150 was the highest score, right? So 148, 147, something along those lines, right? So यहाँ पे difference अगर आप देखोगे, so this is essentially like 70 marks का difference, right? 70 marks did not come from the last 10 pages. The last 10 pages itself is going to be 100 marks. 100 marks है? नहीं, that is only going to be 50 marks, correct? Right, that's basically 50, like 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Yeah, okay. So that's going to be. So you understand, right? So 70 marks कहाँ से आ रहा है? It can't be here. So a major chunk of that difference essentially is coming from the early bits. So यहाँ पे you want to basically focus and don't spend most of your time chasing. मतलब यहाँ पे it's because of PYQ ये कर लो, but that doesn't mean that anything of this particular nature I have to know all of them and उसके लिए मैं notes बनाऊंगी. Okay, and then I'll basically spend my time memorizing. नहीं, you focus 80% of your time on your first 40 pages. Okay, if you have your first 40 pages, then it will be a lot sort of easier for you to be able to handle. Generally, I'll also say that conceptual understanding is, the students who are basically scoring are not necessarily students who have, invested a lot of facts on their paper. Okay. So in case you feel like, you have attempted it and you were not able to sort of like get the kind of score that you wanted and you scored 115, you scored 120. Okay, how come I'm not scoring 140? I'm not scoring 145, 150. Okay, maybe I need to add more and more sort of facts to your answer. Actually, that may not be the right way to think about this. There are students, so last year we had a student who, first attempt, right? First mains. Okay, just finished the foundation course and then took the test series after prelims. And then, within 9, from the moment she started her optional, all the way till she sort of cleared the exam and, sort of got her rank. Okay, it was only around 9 months or something, right? So, and she's like very clear about what she knows, right? So, fact is not something that I can memorize. Then, when she used to say it in the beginning, so I understand, but prelims clear karna hai, to you need it. Yeah, we'll see, but that is not my main strength. The same thing, right? Even in Anthro, she was not much of, give me a lot of facts and I'll be able to memorize it. But she was still able to score close to, 290 or something like this, even without that, because you have the main answer ready. So again, this is again, what you have to do in order to sort of like score very high. A lot of people actually think that, you have to write a lot of facts, a lot of memorization. Anthro requires a lot of fact dumping. See, Anthro में आपको कुछ याद रखने चाहिए. Yes, of course, you have to understand. But a lot of the times, students feel like they studied a lot, they crammed a lot, they made a lot of short notes and they were able to recall in that exam, and whatever relevant they could remember about that particular topic, they were able to write it in the exam, but marks nahi aaye. Why is that? See, and I want you to basically think about this in a different manner, right? So don't just think that, the more number of facts, the more amount of effort that you can show to the evaluator, the more number of marks, right? Instead, try to think to what extent you're able to sort of answer the main essence of the answer. So if you take a look at this was a question in previous year paper, right? So you have discussed the major species of Australopithecus, discovered from both the South and East Africa, describe the discovery, the physical features, the significance of a particular find, which this particular find is your Taung child, right? So that is basically your Australopithecus africanus, not just Australopithecus, but specifically they've asked for your Taung baby, Taung child, Taung baby, right? Of that particular sort. See, यहाँ पे essentially what you have is that you might think that, you know what, I have basically written about all the Australopithecines in that particular grouping, right? I wrote about Paranthropus poiese, I've written about Paranthropus robustus, I've basically written about Africanus and your Anamensis and your references, Lucy and Taung, everything, right? Pura मैंने लिख लिया, okay, and then they've asked about specifically about this Taung baby, so maybe they are testing me whether I know कि Taung baby is the first. Generally, you have a nickname for many of these. Lucy is basically Afarensis, right? So you have things like that, right? So Taung baby, it's Africanus. That's basically what they're testing. Actually, in anthropology, if you want to score, rather than depending on a lot of fact dumping and a lot of memorization, if you just answer the main essence of that particular question, you're going to score a lot higher than somebody who's probably put in a lot more of facts. Right, so a lot more facts equals a lot more marks may not be. See, for instance, this part, right? Describe the discovery, physical features, significance of Taung baby, right? So if you understand concepts, okay, if you understand evolution as basically a very, like a story, right? If you can remember this like a story, you will remember the significance of most finds. In fact, Africanus is basically believed to be one of the most important finds in human evolution. Now you might feel like, why most important, right? Why not your Homo erectus? Why not your Homo habilis? Why not your, the other sort of Australopithecines, right? Why Africanus? So this is essentially the question. What is that importance, right? So there might be somebody who basically, like what could be the answers? Like a lot of students who basically had to attend this particular question because, and this was question number 5, I believe. No, this is question number 2. So question number 3 and question number 4 were of the harder type, if I remember that right. Okay, so a lot of people had to basically choose 2A, B, C, right? So they basically had to sort of attempt this particular question, but they were not able to do justice to this particular point. What did they write? It basically tells us a lot more about evolution. It basically tells us about, another sort of species that have been found. So we basically have more sort of, points in that chain, or that those branches that we are able to sort of understand a little better, and so on and so forth. ये सब तो है, and this basically, for the fun of knowing our past, जो भी लिखोगे ना, you can write as many of these points. But the actual main point है क्या यहाँ पे? Right? Africanus essentially, now there would be somebody who basically remembers this particular story, who who can probably in like 1 to 2 sentences basically address the main point right away. Right? So what do I mean by this? So let's take Australopithecus. Australopithecus africanus was the first find after your what shall I say? It is the first find that was after the 2 major discoveries. So if you look at human evolution, we had your 1850s, 1840s also, 1830s also, but 1850s mainly, okay, you basically had your Neanderthal basically popping in. Okay, so where was Neanderthal found? Neanderthals were actually found in your Europe. Okay, initially it was in Western Europe, and eventually now we know that, West Africa, West Asia, Central Asia, right? Us area maybe you have Neanderthals. Itna to bhi pata hai, right? So this happened in the 1800s. In the 1890s, you have, your Peking man, right? So your not Peking man, your Java man, basically Homo erectus, Asian Homo erectus has been found. So at this particular point, the whole debate of where life began, like where Homo sapiens, so the hominin sort of evolution, where did it begin? We are basically trying to think that it is basically of a Eurasian origin. Right? And a lot of scholars actually believed it, because a lot of the scholars are actually European. Okay, so they want to say that Europe is basically where it began. Okay, and then it was in 1920s that this was found. Okay, 1924, Robert, Dart, right? Raymond Dart, when he found it. For a couple of decades, nobody is believing that this could be ancestral to the other ones. Right? In fact, this one is interesting because this is the first find from Africa, and it is definitely older in terms of features. If you just basically do a simple comparison, it turns out that it is actually earlier, more ancestral kind of features, more quote-unquote primitive kind of features to even your Homo family, okay, your Erectus family, your Neanderthal family. So where do you fit it? A lot of people did not accept it. Later, okay, they basically had not only in Taung, you basically had in Makapanskat, and you had in Starkfontein and some other places, and eventually you realize that, this is basically something that you have to accept. Africa is the cradle of civilization. Now when you study it, it's a matter of fact. Okay, back in the day, it is still a matter of debate. Right? So today we know that Africa, like, when you were born and you've been reading and you've never been exposed to this, right? It is because this particular fossil made it a matter of fact that it is Africa. Right? And this was in the 1920s, and later, a few decades later is basically when they started accepting that. So this, if somebody basically writes, this basically sort of, turned this whole tide of thought, okay, from Eurocentric, okay, or Eurasian sort of centric, beginning to, the human civilization to, to Africa for this Homo sapien family or the hominin family, right? So this is going to be scoring a lot more than n number of points that students have basically written about this particular topic. So conceptual clarity and hitting the essence, even if it is not backed by a lot of points and content and facts and all of that, is going to give them the feeling that this student basically has a much better sort of understanding of what fits in where and what was their role. Okay, now a lot of students basically, understood it differently, right? So they're like, okay, so they're basically asking one more type of questions, which is basically the significance of each sort of like, a species ka find. Okay, now, how many are there? Right, so you basically have Australopithecus, Anamensis hai, within Australopithecus, you have Africanus, so it's been already covered, you have your Robustus, you have your Boise, you have your, one more, which one am I forgetting? Africanus, Anamensis, which one am I forgetting? Okay, so I'm not able to remember that. Okay, so Anamensis, Africanus, okay, Robustus, you have Boise, okay, you have Afarensis, how could I forget Lucy, right? So Lucy, right, so you have Lucy, you have your Homo erectus, okay, within Homo erectus you have a few types, you have your Homo heidelberg, you have your Rhodesian man, you have your entire, Upper Paleolithic, early European modern humans in our syllabus, Cro-Magnon, Grimaldi, Chancelli, sabhi ke significance up, punch, 10 point bana ke padhoge, it makes your syllabus a lot bigger. Instead, what is the main finding? Okay, and if you can study it in a particular sequence, if you go from 8 million years ago, 7 million years ago, actually each phase mein, there is only one particular piece of addition. I'll just tell you in a simple sort of example kind of manner, right? So this is from the previous session. So you take a look at this particular graph, right? So if you can take a look at this particular graph, you will actually see this, right? So 7 million years ago, 8 million years ago, 8 to 6 million years, it's very difficult to put an exact date on it, right? So first thing here is that, what is this particular sequence? In fact, Africanus may you also had one more thing that they basically disproved. They had this feeling that bipedalism came later, brain size increase came first, right? Because, you had the initial finds. A Neanderthal was much bigger, in fact, even bigger than humans. Okay, on average, it is bigger than humans as well, right? But this one basically showed that bipedalism has happened. Okay, you can actually see it, but brain size basically comes a lot later in this particular sequence. So yahan pe kya ho raha hai? So you basically have the smaller canines. So essentially you don't have like the other sort of primates, from the primate family, right? The primate order, if you take a look, the canines basically, are longer. Right, you're starting to see that the canines are becoming smaller. So this is essentially okay. So hominin family starting, Sahelanthropus chadensis, you have it, right? You start seeing a couple of other ones. Thankfully, you don't have it in your syllabus, okay, because the syllabus was basically set in stone a long time ago, right? So bipedalism you can actually see with Ardipithecus kedaba. You basically can see it with Ororin tugenensis. Based on their femur, based on their toe bone, they're able to say that okay, bipedalism has occurred somewhere here. In this particular period, it's kind of fuzzy. We don't have too many fossils. We have some specimen, but not something from where we can sort of generalize. Eventually you basically see that the toes are becoming a lot more in line. So this is in fact interesting. I'll just give you an example, right? So if I take, I think it's there. So here, if I can put it here, so let's say I have Anamensis. Okay, so you should be Australopithecus anamensis, right? So this is basically the one. Okay, it is Australopithecus anamensis. Okay, why is it important? Because it's the first time, okay, we are completely moving away from having, like you have opposable thumb today, right? So you also used to have opposable toes, right? Opposable big toes you essentially had, right? So yahan se essentially you're not having it. So you get the picture, right? So you're starting to see a lot of differences, a lot of, so but if you take a look at it in this particular sequence, you'll realize that over a period of time, it takes 1,000,000 years to make one change, right? So if you study it in this particular sequence, where do you have this? So far we basically have Homo habilis, okay, and this is definitely accepted, right? Homo habilis, but we also have Lomequi tools, right? For instance, now we are basically going back a few thousand years, few 100,000 years, 500,000 years, 800,000 years. We are basically starting to see some tools called the Lomequi tools. Okay, now so this basically goes against what Louis Leakey had basically said in the 1960s. Okay, Homo family essentially started, that the tool maker, the handyman, right? So we are basically saying that now you have, non-Homo family too, who basically had even cruder version of tools. Are we sure that it were tools? Yes. Yes. Now anthropologists are actively arguing, but we are not necessarily sure who it is. Right? So was it Kenyanthropus platyopus? Was it your references? Now if you have more specimen, maybe in some time we can even say maybe it is a Paranthropus boisei or and whatnot. So this is whose? right? So it's generally not a matter of fact, but this is basically the story. So stone tools, Homo habilis, so this is essentially how you basically put it anyway, right? So Homo habilis, and eventually you have your human traits basically appearing. What kind of ones, right? So BFL, always remember this, right? So your brain size is basically starting to increase, okay? So larger encephalization, you have, your fingers may a lot more sort of dexterity, right? So tool usage, so you can basically link it to that, like meaning you have precision grip, okay, on top of your power grip, right, on top of your prehensile grip. You're basically starting to see this. In fact, if you look at this structurally, right, the legs have for the first time in this entire sequence, the legs are becoming longer than your torso, right? Okay, the legs are becoming longer than your arms, essentially, right? And when does it happen? This basically happens here. So if you basically learn this entire sequence over a million years, only a couple of things essentially happen, right? So in this entire family, yahan pe whatever you write, add one more here. Okay, whatever you write here, add the most important one here, right? So anytime you basically are given any of these questions that seem to be a little analytical, and if you understand this kind of a sequence, okay, but it's not a straight line, of course, right? So there are branches. I'm not basically drawing the phylogenetic tree. I'm basically just drawing the timeline here, okay? Controlled use of fire, right? So the use of fire was already there 1.9 million years ago, Lake Takana, Kubifora, but we don't know it is controlled use of fire. Controlled use of fire is like you are actively able to sort of like create fire, use it. Okay, now that is controlled use of fire. Now we have certain places where we know for sure that it has been used, right? So that basically brings in cooking, and cooking ke liye, you have certain kind of hypotheses, right? So this is Homo Heidelberg. Again, it's very difficult to say matter of fact, but you understand this, right? So if you understand in this kind of a story, any answer that you write to any particular topic in this particular module, okay, even if you're not backing in with like tons and tons of points and facts and things that you have memorized, okay, you will still be able to handle these answers better, okay, and you're going to be scoring a lot higher, right? So I hope this is actually a good question to sort of like, talk about many different aspects. I hope this is kind of clear as well. Okay. Again, COVID-19, I think I've basically explained in that. Okay, again, I wanted to go a little more into conceptual understanding than, whole bunch of case studies and, and examples and all that, right? So those are all additions, right? So main thing you should have is, did you hit the essence? In fact, this is another sort of question, right? So let's say that this is the kind of tools that you have in your lower Paleolithic, okay? And the next slide, I'll basically show you the kind of tools that you have in your middle Paleolithic. Now, of course, we know that low Paleolithic comes first, you have your Homo habilis, you have your Homo erectus and so on, okay? And in the next phase, you're essentially going to see a little more of sophistication, right? You're going to see a little more of innovation, refinement, advancement, however you call it. But if there is a particular question, okay, and there have been questions in this regard, do I have a question? I don't have a UPSC question right away, but there have been these questions to show the sequence or the development or to describe the advancement. Okay, it is basically asking you to talk about the advancement of the stone tool sort of traditions within your Paleolithic, right? So now you might think that what. Okay, the question is basically asking about lower Paleolithic and middle Paleolithic. I have to write about lower Paleolithic, I have to write about entire middle Paleolithic, and I have to say ki yahan se yahan it basically became a lot more sort of advanced. But the question would be, why is it considered to be an advancement? Thoda sa pause karo and try to think, okay, so why are these tools, okay, more advanced than these tools? Okay, now you can't say, look at it, it's more advanced. Okay, you've got to write some relevant points for it. Okay, thoda sa socho. Again, in what way to think, I'm just saying, right, conceptual understanding, okay, hitting the essence of that particular answer, okay, of that particular question is more important than, a whole lot of, describing of all of these kind of tools. Again, if you've basically been able to sort of like put these, okay, and then just mention ki matlab cleaver is so and so type, okay, and if you have a hand axe, it is a little more, it has, it's a little pointy, matlab, agar ye likhoge to isse zyada you don't need to describe these tools. Now you have to basically argue why that was considered to be more advanced and why do we draw the line there. Okay, let me complicate it further, right? If I ask you a particular question, right, why do you not say that the why do you make the division, okay, lower and middle, okay, after Acheulean? Okay, why not basically make a division that is right after your older one, pebble tool tradition, okay, and then make the other one as a major change? Actually, the point here is that the advancement really, it's easier to sort of club your older one tradition and your Acheulean tradition, okay, and then it will be easier to differentiate the tools, your points and your scrapers and your borers in your middle Paleolithic, if you understand the logic behind why these are separate, right? Now you will say ki yahan pe tradition is your block on block anvil, your cylinder hammer technique, you matlab wahan pe level wide tradition hai, you basically have your Mousterian tradition, fine, but it doesn't really hit the nail on its head. Thoda sochoge na, Actually, यहाँ पे answer, the essence of this particular answer is that, you know, the tools that you have in your lower Paleolithic is basically one tool for all activities. It is not one tool for everything. It's not one tool for one particular task, right? So in case you want to take, what do you go for? Hand axe or how? You want to break open some bones, okay, you're a scavenger in the lower Paleolithic era, you want to sort of like break open some bones and then try to get some nutritious, what do you call that, bone marrow, right? So bone marrow, okay, so you want to do it, what do you go for? The same tool, okay? In case you want to sort of like scrape off some meat of the bones, what do you go for? You basically go for the same, right? You get the picture, right? So it is like one tool that was used for multiple activities. In fact, Raymond Corby basically says, okay, it is the longest used tool, but it's very difficult to say what exactly it must have been used for, but it looks like, according to many scholars, it is used for every activity. But by the time you come here, okay, you can see the middle Paleolithic tools, right? So in terms of the design, in terms of the function, now we are basically starting to see a big difference, and that difference is that you want to sort of like skin something, okay, what do you go for? Okay, you're basically going to go for a particular tool. You want to sort of like, you know, spearing के लिए अगर आपको कुछ use करना है, what do you go for? You basically go for one. Actually, it is a point. Okay, you want to make holes into something, you know, maybe let's say you're using a hide and you want to sort of like create some sort of like clothing apparatus from it. Okay, what do you go for? You know, you basically go for. So you get the picture, right? Your awls and things like that. So essentially, humans have become a little more advanced in thinking that I have different sort of purposes during the day, okay, to sort of like survive in this world, okay. And for this particular purposes, I'm going to use this. For this particular purpose, I'm going to use this. And for this particular purpose, I'm going to use this. And for all of these things, I'm going to create different sort of tools. This is basically the advancement, right? So in shape, in design, there is differences, of course, but a lot more so in terms of function as well. Okay, this is the first time you're basically also using a certain kind of reasoning to use two different products in order to put them together and create these hafting tools, composite tools. This is basically a pairing. Right? So when you say ki, it has been a little more advanced, it has been a little more you know, innovative and a little more refining, and it basically requires a little more work, all true, but the essence has not been hit. So if you have conceptual understanding and you hit it, okay, same thing, you know, when you go from this to your upper Paleolithic, I can't go through all of those things, you will see a lot of benefits there as well. Us kind of answers will basically score a lot more, guys. When you're looking at 150 plus, those are the kind of answers that you're basically looking at. Similarly, see, this is another point that I wanted to say. So in case you're basically doing a topic which you feel is a lot more fact oriented, you know, memory, and sir मेरे से ये revise नहीं हो रहा है, sir मेरे से ये memorize नहीं हो रहा है, if I have to basically do this, मतलब 5 दिन जो 4 दिन 4.5 days जो मुझे मिलेंगे, you know, between my, you know, optional के लिए, उसमें से 2.5 days basically goes for these kind of topics, sir मैं क्या करूँ? Actually, my suggestion is when you learn this, okay, try to focus a little more on the concept, okay. Try not to go directly into the PYQs and memorize those PYQs, because it will be a lot of facts, okay, you know, and it becomes a lot to remember, and you know, you don't know whether you will be able to sort of remember them all and recall them all, and even if you're able to do all of them, right, you don't know whether you're hitting the nail on its head, okay. Are you really addressing the demand of the question? But agar is topic ko, and it's a very simple sort of topic, this is only 1.5, you take 1.6, okay, again you take your lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic, you know, the archeo from your paper 1, your paper 2, these topics you basically focus a lot more on the concept, and if you're thorough with the concept, any question they ask you, okay, and you will realize this, okay, and you take a look at this if you want proof. 2023 paper, 2024 पेपर अगर आप उठा के देखोगे, they are not necessarily asking you कि इस one particular place में कितने कितने क्या क्या what all have been found. Right? That is basically not the question that they are asking. They are asking you a lot more sort of analysis based questions. They are asking you more concept based questions. You understand, right? थोड़ा सा analytical है वो section. So if you basically are like you understand this really well, okay, then any kind of question that comes from here becomes something that is easy for you to derive in the exam hall. Okay, now if you basically take मतलब इसका only PYQs आप करोगे and you know and you're focusing कि you know it's very difficult for me to sort of understand this, तो मैं पूरा पढ़ लूँगा, okay, या पढ़ लूँगी, and then basically whenever the question comes, I'll see what I can recruit from here, okay. But a lot of times you will not understand even the core demand of that particular question. अगर ये simple आपको understand हो गया, okay, any question can be answered. Any question can be answered. Let's say, you know, they're asking you this question about tertiary quaternary sort of fossil. Now, if you don't go in that sequence, okay, all the way from today, go back all the way to, you know, so if I can come back here and I here, and let's see if I can just go to the next page. How do you go to the next page? Here. See, for instance, you have, okay, let's say this is your humans. Okay, let's say that these are your chimpanzees and bonobos. Okay, and then I have my orangutans. Okay, gorillas, orangutans. Okay, I have my, okay, lesser ape, okay, which is your siamangs, your gibbons, and so on and so forth. I have my old world monkeys. I have my new world monkeys. Okay, and again, you know, you can make it as big as you want. You can basically go old new world monkeys, right? And then I'm going to have my, okay, lemurs and lorises, and I'm going to have my tarsiers and so on. Right now, it is very difficult. If agar aapka ho gaya, if you have memorized all the kind of features of all of these things, first of all, salute to you. Okay, matlab you rock. Okay, I have to give it to you, right? Because most people will not be able to do it. Okay, and it becomes very difficult, right? You have to focus a little more on key what happens. So if this is considered the primitive end of the chain, and this is considered more advanced end of the chain, okay, in terms of certain kind of physical features, okay, what makes it primitive, what makes it more sort of advanced? यहाँ से यहाँ आने में मतलब एक दो ही important features है. So if you basically studied this, +2 आपको ये आ गया, यहाँ से आपको ये पढ़ना है, +2 ये आ गया, and in fact this is basically just monkeys. You can basically study this and then you can understand what are the main differences. That's all you have. What are the differences? Essentially, you know, yahan pe the dental architecture is slightly different from here. Old world monkeys are same as us, whereas yahan pe, you know, the premolars basically they have one extra. Right, that is one such difference, right? Yahan pe the new world monkeys essentially have those kind of tails, okay, that are bushy and they're strong and they're sturdy, which can be used as, you know, for their brachiation. Basically, they can even hang from the, you know, from the trees, right? So they can basically use that. There is differences in the kind of noses that they have. One is broader, new world monkeys is broader, they basically open towards the side, whereas old world monkeys basically have their nostrils opening downwards, right? So that's it. Okay, ये हो गया. Okay, बाकी सब तो same ही है. Okay, plus दो features आएंगे यहाँ पे, plus दो features, yeah, you know, it will be there. Okay, and this is all, you know, your orangutan and gorilla and chimpanzee, and then you have the humans, right? So it becomes a lot easier. And ये क्या है? And you will understand your chapter number 1.6, the hominin family is basically from here to here. And who's this? This is your, let me just mark it here. This is your, oops. Okay, so this is going to be your last common ancestor. Okay, and this is exactly here. If I can go back to the previous page, okay, and this is exactly here. That's 7 million years ago, last common ancestor, right? So this is an entire chapter, 1.6. This is going to be, you know, that chapter is basically from here to here. 1.5, okay, the primates, right? So you've seen this, right? So this particular entire chapter, this covers this entire family. This contains this entire family, and you can see this this entire sequence. Now, if you want to go back and tertiary and quaternary, हम नहीं पढ़ पाएंगे. Basically, you know, we all start from Purgatorius, okay, or Plesiadapiform, and you know, it is like the father and the mother to all of these kind of primates, you know, in the late Cretaceous period. Okay, 65 million years, 66 million years, and even prior to that. So, you know, along with the dinosaurs. Uske baad, you know, the early Miocene period, you basically have a couple of them. Okay, Omomoioids. Okay, you have your adipoids, you know, so you basically have more basically appearing. So from the Purgatorius, okay, all the way to the next one, ek do features hi add hote. You understand that if you understand that particular sequence, right? So in the early one, so we say that it is the ancestral mammal. It basically kind of looks partially like a squirrel, mongoose, a rat, you know, उस type का combination है. But it did not have the same kind of features that we would define primates today, right? Forward-facing eyes, नहीं थे. Okay, you know, encircled by bone, नहीं थे. Okay, nails instead of claws, nahi the. But when you come to the next phase, okay, and it moves, right? You start seeing a little bit of additions that are happening. Rather than remembering ki now adipids ke liye mujhe I have to basically remember these 5-10 point, and yahan pe I have to basically study these 5-10 point. It becomes very difficult, right? So that's a wrong way to study. And agar aise padhoge, it shows to them also that you have a lot more sort of interest, and if not interest, at least you have a lot better sort of understanding. And these kind of answers are the one that basically goes to that 150 plus. Okay? So that is another thing that I would basically like to touch upon. Session has gone a little longer than I had expected, okay, but that's okay. One more point that I would basically say, don't chase extreme questions. Now let us say you take a look at paper 2024, okay, now you start seeing that, you know, 30% questions are easy, 30% questions are difficult, okay, there are some questions that are analytical and there are some questions that are not doable at all. And then you look at, and you will fixate on those bouncer questions, right? Oh, I don't know about these questions. Okay, the toppers basically have studied those topics. मतलब मेरा content का problem है, मेरा book का problem है, my Ember का problem है, right? So whatever it is, you start. So it's like prelims, right? You can study for 30, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%. You cannot chase every single question. And in fact, most of the questions students don't attempt, right? They might give you a 10 marker that is not doable, but that will not be the difference maker. Okay, mera, you know, let's say a student who's a topper who's basically scored 2 marks there, okay, 2.5 marks there. Somebody who was not prepared that well is going to still score like half mark less. Usse kya hoga? right? So that is not much of a difference maker. So you focus on scoring in at least 35 to 40 pages. Wahan pe you have to be able to score 1 mark extra. I basically give a question, cultural relativism and ethnocentrism, score more. You get the picture, right? I basically ask you a very simple sort of question about, the changes in family structure, that is happening in probably the Western world. Okay, have a very, you basically find a way to basically get 2 marks, 3 marks, if it's a 15 marker, 20 marker, right? Difference wahi se aate hain. Okay, it is not in these extreme answers. In fact, take a look at this question. This is from 2023. Okay, and so look at this. Most of the students did not attempt this particular question because there was this one question: describe various methods of qualitative data analysis and highlight some popular computer softwares used in qualitative analysis. And if you have to highlight, well, SPSS likhoge, and some people who are in the tech wala thing, but there are specific things that are used in anthropology world. Now, most students have not known that. Okay, and how many students do you think? Amongst my students, only one student has attempted this particular question, and that is because one of the questions he could not revise enough, and he felt other students could do better, right? So it is not because he knows this particular question. Okay, thankfully he's still in IPS. Okay, he got IPS with this one, but of course he has lost marks here, right? So according to him, right? So he has that. Okay, so this is not a question. So again, you take a look at this particular question. So this was another question. Okay, that was question number 7. This is question number 8. In fact, I have only one student who has written this particular question. Okay, because Arjuna Padurai, we had covered it, but there is also another question, A.L. Krober and his contribution to kinship studies, right? So you might think that, okay, now I have to basically take a look at every particular scholar and their contribution to some other topic that, that might not be directly from the syllabus or from your PYQs, and then you might go ahead and then, go in the wrong direction. But actually, students have not written this particular question. I had only one student who has written it, and that student, he has already gone to 4 interviews before this, right? So don't chase extreme questions. Try to find questions, okay, jahan pe you're able to score, in the first 35-40 pages, jahan pe they are doable kind of questions. And in those doable kind of questions, your target should be very clear. Okay, agar 10 marker hai, you have to find a way to score at least 1 extra mark there. Okay, compared to most good students. If it's a 15 marker, what is your answer? In 15 marker, you should basically try to get at least 2 marks extra compared to somebody else who's writing a good answer. Okay, and if it's a 20 marker, you have to find a way to basically get those 3. Okay, rather than knowing this, right? So there are going to be questions. You are going to be able to, agar PYQ hai, to you will basically know it. You would have studied it a little later. But you are going to be getting some questions jahan pe aapko bhi aise questions aayenge. Okay, you are not going to be making much of a difference in these kind of questions because this is basically, this is sort of an equalizer. Okay, but the differences is going to be in questions jahan pe they are doable. Okay, I think this is the last point that I have. Okay, in order for you to score high, right? Try to understand when you're writing a paper that is of master's level, okay, it is, not everything is a matter of fact. Okay, not everything is a matter of fact. See, I'll give you an example, simple example in case, to help you understand. Okay, most Americans actually feel that World War II meant dropping the atomic bomb on Japan was the right thing to do. Okay, when I was in university, I was there, and students basically said, no, that was not wrong. Okay, it was required. We had to basically sort of like put off this entire Nazi and the Japanese sort of aggression, and that saved more lives than the lives that were killed because of this, right? So we basically don't study that particular manner, and they know our side of the argument also, and they basically know another sort of argument, and they're basically arguing that nahi, it was actually the right thing. Hum aise nahi padhte hain history. At least not in school level. How do we study it? Okay, America did a wrong thing by basically sort of like, resulting in, ultra, jo radiation related issues that basically last several decades after that, several generations after that, right? So, but when you go to college, your history becomes a matter of many debates. Agar aap IBC ke bare mein baat karoge, okay, so if you're talking about language mein there are many different sort of debates. Okay, if you're talking about, let's say, Harappan religion, there are certain kind of debates there. In fact, even in terms of the political sort of centralization, all of that, there are debates there. So you've got to be able to understand, and present not everything as a matter of fact, but try to explain the context. Okay, what exactly is happening in anthropology that today we feel ki maybe this is right, and why there is another school of thought that maybe is not, they probably, vehemently arguing the other side. Okay, intellectual debate hi hota hai universities mein, right? So let's take you, through, let's say, Neolithic. Okay, so let's say agar aap Neolithic ke bare mein ek answer likh rahe ho, okay, you just don't want to say, these are the kind of tools that have been found here, cell tools and things like that. Agriculture basically comes in, pottery basically comes in. These are the kind of regional places. This is basically the diagram of the tools. Ek India map dila diya, right? You want to sort of integrate more hypothesis into your answer. Okay, how do we know what we know? right? So this is the kind of thing. Okay, so for instance, what are the things that you could bring in? So let's say, okay, Child's Oasis kind of theory, okay, Braidwood's nuclear area theory, and you know, systems theory, and so on and so forth, right? So all of these things basically are telling you what could be the reason why agriculture began. Okay, now this is, you know, different kind of perspectives that you're bringing into your answer, right? So for instance, Oasis theory is like, you know, dryness was there, you know, ice age, you know, it happened, you know, and when you have a dry sort of area and you have an oasis, I don't want to go into the theories as much, but the point is that, you know, everybody basically congregates here, whether it is humans, whether it is animals, and, you know, animals and humans and domestication, you get the picture, right, where they are basically going with this, right? Similarly, you have a couple of other theories and things like this. And in fact, you also have criticisms for this, right? In fact, an even better debate, or a simpler sort of debate, is whether Neolithic was actually a revolution. Was it indeed a revolution, or was it an evolution? Would it happen over a period of time? It is evolution because of X, Y, these sort of reasons, and this is why scholars feel it could be an evolution. Something that drastic cannot come in like one go, right? Or it is a revolution. It was not an evolution. It basically came and hit immediately. Okay, and when it hit, there was a major sort of change in different kind of aspects of humans, right? Every different aspect, right? So again, you know, there are some scholars basically say it is not progress, but it is basically control. Why so? You know, in fact, if you studied your history, right, whenever you have agriculture and you have rulers, when there is hierarchy, basically what happens is that it is easier to sort of control the people who are settled in one particular place. You can actually see how much they own, how much they basically are growing, and how much they can be taxed, rather than, let's say, you know, your hunters and gatherers. You don't know where they are tomorrow, right? You don't know how much is basically the gathering or the hunt that they have basically been able to sort of produce, right? And usme se kitna, so it becomes a lot more difficult. So this could be this one. So basically, again, understand that yahan pe, if you want to go a little deeper, try to bring in these kind of debates, try to bring in these kind of hypotheses. Why do we believe, you know, so for instance, let's say that, you know, let's say Narmada fossil, you know, your Homo erectus, okay, Narmada man, Narmada lady, right? So again, so it's a very simple sort of a debate here, right? So some classified Homo erectus because it has certain kind of features that make it, you know, more in line with the erectus family, not with the sapiens family, but some feel that, you know, it is a lot closer in terms of timeline, in terms of, you know, the skull cap that has been found, in terms of certain other things that basically make it. Now, who are they? This some. Who are these others, right? This makes it, you know, a good sort of a debate, because these are the contributions that are being made in the field of paleoanthropology, okay, to you know, to these areas, right? And because of this, if it is considered as an archaic Homo sapiens, what does it do to this out of Africa, multi-regional, you know, the recent out of Africa, basically this one. So basically you're taking a small little aspect and basically connecting to the wider debate in the particular field. What could be the finding, or what could be the finalization of this as this, or this basically have a bearing on the larger sort of debates of human evolution as a whole, right? That if you can present in your answer, trust me, this is the kind of answer that is going to give you, paper complete karoge, so this is basically 150 plus. Right? Now, a lot of students essentially are not able to bring these sort of elements into their answers, and this is essentially what you would want to try to focus on when you're preparing, when you're writing, okay? These are the kind of things that you want to prioritize. Overall, if I want to give the final piece of advice, right? See, studying is very important, okay? Understanding is very important, but do not leave writing, okay? At the end of the day, that is basically the final skill, right? You can do all the work in the gym, okay? But if you're a bowler, you basically have to go and bowl, you know, out there, right? So as much of practice bowling in the nets is going to make you a lot more sort of prepared, right? Now again, aisa hai, so if you're going to bowl or if you're going to bat, okay, again, you know, take it progression, right? So agar aap batsman ho, so you don't want to be taking, you don't want to be facing Bumrah in the beginning, right? So it's not going to do you any, ek ghante ke liye bat karoge, so it's not going to give you any sort of returns. Either you're going to be out, either you're going to be beaten, or either you're going to sort of get hurt. So 100 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour aapko bat karna hai, then 110 and 120, 130, 140, and then you want to build. So don't take very difficult questions in the very beginning, right? So pehle to you have to write easy questions ke baad you write medium questions, and medium ke baad write try more analytical questions, okay? Analytical questions ke baad then, you know, you can basically go after those very difficult, okay, bouncer kind of questions. But this should be the way in basically you focus. So every module ke liye aap aise start karo, right? So this is something that is kind of important. Let's say you're writing an answer, okay, so either in our program or wherever you're writing, okay, agar ghar pe bhi kar rahe ho, after you write the answer, try to take, you know, ek do important point that you can add to your answer, even if you feel like your answer is very good. Okay, so that will basically tell you ki, you know what I wrote, okay, that made me more comfortable with writing, it helped me in expressing what I know, okay, and test myself on how my expression is, okay. At the same time, I've also been able to add like a point or two, okay, more than what I was able to sort of put into my paper. So a couple of takes to every answer that you do, you'll feel like, you know, you're growing as well. Okay. And when you're writing an answer, always remember, ask yourself this particular question. Okay, अगर evaluation नहीं मिल रहा है, okay, आप घर से अपने आप से कर रहे हो, always ask yourself, and self criticism is the best, right? And you tend to be a lot more critical of yourself than somebody else ever is going to be of you, right? So when you write an answer, always ask yourself, did I really address the demand of that particular question? Even if you came out with that particular question, you ask, okay, let me reread this particular question. What could the real demand be? And how much of this answer that I have written basically addresses the real demand of this particular question? Okay, albeit without, sufficient number of facts, or, you might be a little short on scholars, or you might not know a certain kind of debate. It doesn't matter. But if this particular question is asked, did I address it? Okay, or I have filled like 3 pages, 4 pages based on everything that I know in that particular topic, right? So this is a very, very important element that you would want to do, okay? And eventually always see to it that when you're writing your answers, okay, try to focus more on analysis, just like I showed you in your Homo erectus Narmada man question, or in Neolithic kind of question, right? And rather than just, more and more sort of facts and, all these kind of things to your answer, right? Because eventually that is going to be difficult to sort of remember, and you will also understand that factual papers, questions are not being very factual. They're not checking your facts, they're not checking your ability to memorize, they're asking you analysis based questions. So even when you're doing some validation and things like that, try to see that analysis is basically the focus for you, okay? And, learning about more of these kind of hypotheses, these kind of things would do you a lot more good than just adding a lot of facts. Thode facts chahiye aapko in order to be able to write decent answers, okay? Some specifics are always required, in all the modules it is required, but don't just keep chasing that and think that, agar mera score 240 hai, if I have to go to 260, if I have to go from 260 to 280, it is based on more and more facts that I have to add to my answer, right? So I hope that this is, I have covered most of the things that I want to. I hope that you have a better idea of how to write and why to write and what should be the strategy while you're pursuing your writing goals, okay? So with that, all the very best, okay? And, hopefully you do really well in your mains. Take care, bye-bye.